Alright guys, so I've already touched on the first two DLCs for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, and the third one apparently released, which I just had no clue about. I didn't hear anything about it. I actually didn't even know this existed until that Bardock trailer came out. I've already done a video talking about that, so if you want to go watch that, that's on the channel also, as well as my reviews of the first two DLCs. But let's talk about the third one. So it takes place in the original timeline, is what I like to call it, right? What should have happened if Trunks hadn't gone back in time, right? Everyone's dead. It's just Gohan and Trunks versus the androids, right? And so the way I see this is the DLC is split into three parts. You have the first segment, which is Gohan training Trunks. By the way, if you haven't watched Dragon Ball Z or played the DLC, there's going to be spoilers in what I'm about to say, but I assume you have if you've played this game. But regardless, that's the first section. You play a little bit as Trunks as a kid, but mainly as Gohan fighting the androids. Right? Then from there, you have your second part, which is spoilers. After Gohan has died, you fight the androids and train as Trunks, as a teen, the Trunks we know, future Trunks. And then the third part is after you beat the androids, and that's where things go downhill, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let me go ahead and start, as from a gameplay perspective, from the beginning. So as the first DLC saw you training and powering up to achieve your Super Saiyan God form to fight Beerus, the second one had you leveling up and introducing group fights, and those 100 versus like 3 fights to hit Super Saiyan Blue to fight Frieza. Well, now the third DLC where you play as Trunks and Gohan, you start out with what I thought was a very worrying mechanic at first. So they scatter these drones throughout the open world, and if you stay in the radius for too long, some stay stationary and some actually chase you within their zone. And if you get detected by them and the bar is completely filled, then the androids come and fight you. Now, you're incredibly underleveled at this point, so you really don't want to be doing that if you don't have to. You have to go to that big purple ball you see there in the center to wipe out all of the drones in this area and kind of clear it so that you can traverse the map freely. But what I learned pretty early on is you can get within, I want to say it was 250, maybe it was 350 yards of this control drone and just take it out before the other ones get to you. Now this is early on when I didn't know that. I didn't really know what you were supposed to be doing. I thought this mechanic was going to be really annoying. But honestly, you can just fly right by them if you don't want to mess around with them. And the rewards for doing it essentially are collectibles or healing items, which you really don't need. So you can pretty much skip this mechanic overall, which I really enjoyed, because I was worried that this was gonna really slow down the pace of the DLC. Now from here, again, like I said in this part 1 as I'm calling it, you train as Trunks with Gohan, you fight the androids as Gohan a couple of times, you fight him as Kid Trunks a couple of times, and that's pretty much it. And so something that's different about this DLC from the rest of the game is everything else is interconnected. If you go through and grind through the story, the main story, and hit level 300 as Gohan, and then you go into DLC 1 or DLC 2 as Gohan, you'll be level 300. It works backwards as well. If you go play the first DLC and get all of the XP booster items as Goku and Vegeta, you can then go back into your main story and give them to other characters and level them up. This is the first time you can't do that. So you load in, I want to say at the beginning, you gotta be like level 20, right? And the androids are like level 23, 24, a couple levels above you, right? And there's side missions and like the training arena with Bulma inside Capsule Corps, but aside from that, there's no way that you can take your progression from other parts of the game and bring them into this one. So the fights are actually really hard. Now, the one-on-one fights aren't a problem, right? I mean, as long as you understand the mechanics and you've played through the game, it's relatively simple. You might have to, take a loss once to learn the moveset, but after that, you're pretty much solid. But where I actually struggled, and this was the hardest fight in the game, was with the one-on-two fights. So typically throughout the main story and both of the DLCs prior to this, when you're having to fight multiple enemies, they're either grunts that you overlevel so much that it really doesn't matter that you're fighting multiple of them, or they give you an ally or two so that the enemy is distracted and you have support here and there. And so they do this in the beginning, obviously while Gohan is alive. And then spoilers, once he dies, you're on your own as Trunks. And there is a solo fight as Gohan. That one's kind of hard, but it's not as bad as the Trunks one. The final Trunks fight, where you fight both the androids as Trunks, is fairly difficult. I want to say it's the hardest fight in the game, as long as you're appropriately leveled throughout the rest of the game. If you go into stuff underleveled in the main story and DLCs, I'm sure they're a lot harder, but here, like I mentioned earlier, since you can't boost yourself up, you really are stuck at this level of difficulty. Now, the only thing that could be contributing to this that I could think of, other than just that's the way it was designed, and I'm not complaining, I'm just letting you guys know, if you haven't played this, it is quite difficult. But recently, I did restart the main story on the hardest difficulty, and so assuming that your difficulty, transitions into the DLCs as well, I was probably also playing this on the hardest difficulty, while also being stuck under-leveled, I would say. And so that just factored in, and again, I'm not complaining. I liked that it was difficult. I actually had some fun, except for one fight that we'll talk about here in a minute. And so, my only other gripe with part 1 and 2 of this DLC, the part where you're fighting the androids as both Gohan and Trunks, is that they lock off the shop where you would buy healing items and all of that stuff to each story segment. So what I mean by that is after Gohan dies, you go to fight the androids, I want to say twice, it might be 3 times, but on the final time, the time that's obviously going to be the hardest, they lock the store. You're not allowed to go to the shop for some reason. Now, didn't think of this, you might have been able to go into the main story and buy more healing items, then transfer back into the DLC, but seeing how your level progress doesn't transfer over, that probably wouldn't have worked anyways. But I'm going into the final fight now, and I really need some healing items, because I haven't bought any. So that's really my only problem with what I'm calling part 1 and part 2 of the DLC, the part where you fight the androids. Now, from there, you get into what I think is just unnecessary. So I talked about earlier the drone part of the DLC at the beginning, right? Well, I thought that was just going to be added to pad runtime to the DLC, make it last longer, right? And you could kind of work your way around it, so it didn't really bother me. But what does bother me is this story works perfectly well. It's the perfect length. These DLCs aren't expensive. I want to say they're like, if you get the Seasons Pass, like $12 for each one of these, right? Because the Seasons Pass is like $30 or something like that, right? So it's not expensive. It's not like I'm paying $30 or $60 for one of these expansions. It's like $12, $13, right? And so the amount of time that the main story took up fighting the androids and training Gohan dying, Trunks becoming a Super Saiyan, I felt that was an adequate amount of content and new stuff added to justify the price. But I guess they didn't, because they just kept going. So after you beat the androids, and I want to say the credits roll, at some point the credits roll, might be after you defeat Cell, but the credits roll, you go through some cutscenes, and then you end up going back to the past, what actually happens in the show. Then you come back, and Cell is there, and you fight Cell, and Trunks is talking this big game, like it's supposed to be, he's so overpowered because of how the future changed, and he's stronger now, blah blah blah, he's a Super Saiyan, he can beat Cell. And again, it might be because I was on the hard difficulty, but I was getting my ass beat, alright? This was not an easy fight. But regardless, you fight Cell, which is just one fight, so fine. I mean, I think you could have thrown this in somewhere else. I think this was just an extra section that, again, they added to pad runtime. Or it could have been a side mission or something that they added earlier on to maybe level you up more for the main fights. But this just felt weirdly placed. But I was like, whatever, one fight, it's over. But then they keep going. So they throw you in to the Buu saga. They do the whole thing with the Z Sword and Supreme Kai and Kakarot and Babidi and Buu and Deborah and all of that, right? But as Trunks. And so this was fine. I want to say it's 3 fights. None of them are too bad except for one, which we'll get to in a minute. This is the final fight that you're watching now, and you have support, so it doesn't make it too unbearable, but it was, again, decently difficult. And so, again, I just felt this was not needed. Like, it was fine with the Android saga, it didn't need to keep going, but it wasn't in any case bad. I mean, it was just more fights. So let me talk about the problem fight, and this isn't it. For some reason, I guess I didn't record it because I was so pissed off. But you do some training with the Supreme Kai and all of that, and you fight like a ghost Gohan before the whole Buu arc starts. And I don't know their names, but you know the dude with like the giant scissor hands that looks like a mantis. They're from the original Buu arc. And then the guy that has like all of the gear and he's like pink or something. I'll put a picture of him. I can't think of their name. Oh, but these two guys. You don't have help for the fight. You're on your own. You're underleveled. I'm on hard difficulty, which again, I didn't think about even factoring in until right now making this video. So I'm at all these disadvantages, right? And it's the most obnoxious fight ever. So typically when you fight a one-on-one, they'd use a mix of melee and ranged attacks. When you fight more than a one-on-one, a one-on-two, one-on-three, whatever, again, like I said earlier, you have your supports, and they'll attack your support characters, or if they do attack you, they don't realistically attack you more than one at a time. If they do, it's relatively balanced. This fight, though, not at all. The pink guy, again, don't know what his name is, he just uses a super long-range, heavy damage move over and over and over and over and over again. And then the big mantis dude just melee spams you the whole fight. And so you're stuck just dodging one and dodging the other at the same time, and you can't really land any attacks reasonably because one's always on top of you, and then if you try to fight the one that's always on top of you, the one shooting you from far, it took me 12 tries to beat that fight, which is absurd. Most of these fights take me like 1 or 2, but I could not beat it, and so I almost quit entirely on that section. So really, just that whole third part, everything with Cell, the whole Boo arc, all of the Z-Sword stuff, it's not really needed here. I just felt like it was added to pad the runtime, but that's just my opinion. You guys let me know what you think of the whole DLC down in the comments below. I don't know when this come out. It's probably a couple months late at this point, but I had no clue this came out, so that's not my fault. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you on the next one.